So yes, overclocking. This is one of the key features of the system, and it's one of the things that was sort of hidden for a while in the pre-release. They did indicate early on that there would be some performance improvements, but it wasn't really clear what that would entail. In the end, what we have is three options. There's enhanced, enhanced plus, and unleashed. And what they do respectively is enhanced just boosts the RAM speed, enhanced plus also boosts GPU speed, and then unleashed also includes the CPU. And the reason it's variable is obviously for compatibility reasons. And there are a few cases where games can break at the higher settings, but by and large, I've been able to use Unleashed in most titles. So, guys, let's go through some of the examples because I've actually prepared a bunch of frame rate analysis clips just for this. One of the first things I want to show just as like an awesome example of speed is, you remember Gauntlet Legends, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I love Gauntlet Legends. I think it's quite a fun game, but I always remember the N64 version being extremely variable in terms of how it ran. So I was curious to see what would happen on the 3D, and it turns out when you overclock this with Unleashed, what you get is a predominantly smooth 60 FPS experience. You can see it here in the video, but like it's smooth. It does dip into the 50s, but otherwise you're looking at a surprisingly stable kind of experience now. I actually kind of need to see if I can test out the PAL version now, because I'm wondering if you do 4K 50 output at 50 frames per second, if it would actually hold steady at 50.
Oh, that would be interesting.
It mostly seems to stay above the 50 line. So
yeah,
that's
I'm actually
impressive.
really excited to play this one now because I've heard a lot of people say they actually prefer the N64 version to the Dreamcast version.
It's an awesome version. Yeah,
I forget the reasons why. And, for N64, it was actually a pretty high performing game at, targeting 60 FPS on the original hardware. But man, it's a fantastic experience from what I've tried so far on the Analogue 3D.
Right?
So this is, I think, one of the best examples of a game that's like, wow, this is, kind of encroaching on what we would expect maybe from a modern game in terms of performance. I mean, I would stress we're not going to see things even out in quite the same way as PS4 games on PS5 or Switch 1 games on Switch 2. It's not going to be quite to that level, but it's within the context is pretty transformative and surprisingly stable for it not breaking stuff in early 3D games.
Exactly. So that part is cool. With the 60 FPS stuff in mind, then, one of the next things I actually tested is I think it was like Return to Yoshi's Island. I forget what it's called, but it's from the developer Kaze is what he goes by, who's famous for doing insane amounts of awesome work with Mario 64 and sort of reverse engineering the game and famously fixing some of the issues that the original code had. And so, like, the dude is very talented, and obviously he released this demo of a game, and I had to test it out because it had an unlocked frame rate option. And if you use it on real N64 hardware, I mean, you're nowhere near 60 FPS, let's be honest, but it's still fun to mess with. But now on the Analogue, you can actually achieve pretty much a stable 60, which is cool. At least in the overworld area. When you get to the area that looks like Super Mario Bros. 1, it's less smooth, although it updates, like, particles update one frame and in the game updates the next frame, so it still registers as 60.
Oh, wow.
But it's not. It's very weird. But that's not an official game. Just wanted to test.
Yeah.
But I think what most people really want to see here are some of the comparisons, all right? So we've prepared a bunch of these. So let me go through a couple of mine here. And then I want you guys to share your findings as well, because we all kind of went off and picked our own games to test. So one of the ones I tested right away, actually, is Cruisin USA.
Heck yeah.
Now, Mark, I think you probably remember this, but back when Cruisin came out, so I didn't have an N64 right away, but my buddy did. And I remember wanting to play this bad after the arcade, and we got it, played on N64, and were instantly crushed by how not smooth it was. You could tell that the frame rate was very unstable, and due to the jittery nature of the gameplay, I actually found it kind of annoying to play. But so I only benchmarked here the first track, and I think some of the later ones are heavier, but that first track by itself is pretty much a stable 30 FPS now, right?
Yeah.
Like it's wild to
Yeah,
see.
I actually played as far. I didn't do FPS capture to get like exact data, but I played as far as the Redwood Forest, which performs really bad on original
Yeah, it
hardware.
does.
Terrible.
Really bad.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like super playable here. San Francisco, the second level is also pretty bad. Yeah, it's actually quite transformative. When this game came out, I had actually not played the arcade version, and 3D was like all new to me. So like I didn't
Oh,
have
I
a lot
see.
of
You didn't
expectations
know.
in terms of like performance and stuff. So I loved this game when my friend got it. However, like even though I didn't like really understand like why the game felt a little janky at the time, like I'm like, man, I really like this game and I want to buy this game, but I can't quite figure out why I feel like it's not worth my money. And performance might have been part of it. I later got it when it was used and very cheap. So I have a big soft spot for it. But man, it's like so much closer to the arcade experience now. So this is just fantastic.
So, just as a note, by the way, on my comparison videos, I have Force Original Hardware as one option, and then I did the Unleashed Overclocking for the other. And the reason is that I actually just used the original hardware function on the Analog 3D, which allows you to simulate the original speed. And in my testing, it does seem to pretty much mimic the real of N64 correctly.
Yeah, but
So-
there are exceptions. There are exceptions.
There are
We
some
may
exceptions.
Talk about that
Exceptions.
later.
Yeah.
We'll get to that shortly. It's not perfect, but it's close enough to what you would get on real hardware. The original hardware might actually be slower even in some cases, but we'll get there. So two other games I wanted to test were GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. And I actually got some interesting results here. So I started with the basic GoldenEye cartridge, the real game, and it does feel noticeably more playable, but I also feel like it's still very unstable. And when you compare it, you see that the frame rate can still drop from, relatively high to like into the 20s and teens, even when fully overclocked. But I will say that it overall raises the floor significantly. So you're not getting like the low teens to almost single digits that you get with the original. And of course, that led me to Perfect Dark. So I did multiple tests for this. So I actually started again with the original cartridge. And right away, we're seeing like I actually ran the intro movie because it's a like for like comparison shot. And when you do that, actually, the interesting thing is that the lines are parallel the entire time, and yet the overclocked mode is usually 5 to 10 frames per second faster, just across the board. So that means that even like some of the slowest bits, like the original game can drop to like 10 FPS, 9 FPS almost, whereas the overclocked one is around 16, 17 in those same scenarios. So that's at the low end. But while playing, it seems to be more in the 25 to 30 range, which I think feels significantly better, right? But I don't know, Audie, maybe you are the king of homebrew and stuff. And I should note that, like GoldenEye, the frame rate can go above 30 FPS, but it doesn't do so much. And that's where something called Perfect Dark High Performance Mod comes in. Are you familiar with this one?
I'm actually not.
Okay. I wasn't either until searching it out, but this is a version of the ROM that made some improvements to the game somehow. And it allows it to run smoother. And when you couple that with the Unleashed mode, so my first comparison was high performance mod versus the regular cartridge with Unleashed, and we're seeing huge boosts, sometimes upwards of 20 frames per second more with the Perfect Dark performance mod. It's actually like really, really fast. And when you bring in that versus the original hard or non overclocked mode, like it's literally can be like 2 to 3 times the frame rate. Like there's scenes where it's like 40 to 45 to 50 FPS with the mod, and it goes down to like freaking like 10 on original hardware.
I'd
So
love to see them implement a 30 FPS cap because there's not much of a compelling reason to shoot for higher than 30 on
I
these games
agree.
because you're not going to get there on original hardware
Nope.
or FPGA hardware.
No.
So
Exactly. And that would actually be a really cool thing to do with this modded version is if they could implement a proper 30 cap because the game spends most of its time above 30 FPS now, which means that it would actually produce a pretty stable experience if they could offer that cap. Because right now it's like when you go into the stairways, it'll jump up to like 60 FPS, and you go out into the office area and it's like 25 to 30, which would be perfectly okay with a 30 FPS cap, I think.
I mean, right now it also
So
looked kind of undercranked. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but just it looks a little bit sped up to me whenever it kind of goes higher than those frame rates.
I see what you mean, but I think it's just like this perception because we're so used to seeing it at this like stupidly low frame rate.
Could be.
yeah.
And it does color the way you view the game. But I found those really interesting.
It is actually true that Rare sometimes did do some things to compensate for slowdown. The one that I'm aware of is Donkey Kong 64. I guess supposedly like when it hits a patch of slowdown, it actually like speeds up the game so that like the perceived uh, perpetuation of motion isn't altered. And that's actually a potential cause for an issue that we'll talk about later. But I don't know if something like that could be going on here in Perfect Dark. Maybe
It's entirely possible, but that got me to test a couple other Rare games as well myself, and I think you guys tested some too, of course. But well, actually, I don't have the frame rate analysis for this, but look at this. The intro demo it's an updated version of Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong Racing, and it allows it to run at a smoother frame rate, but the entire introduction sequence plays out at a rock solid 60 FPS. Like just look at this. This is crazy, right?
That is it. I almost don't like it. It's too witchcrafty.
It looks like a Dreamcast game almost somehow. But it's neat to see it. But that got me thinking about other games like Killer Instinct Gold, which I'm rubbish at, by the way. But in that game on real hardware, there's a lot of dips, if you recall.
Yeah.
Every time you do any kind of special moves, certain effects appear, the frame rate temporarily just goes like it plops pretty hard, and you feel it a lot. And Running Unleashed, sure enough, fixes that right up. It's like a flat 60 pretty much. And that is awesome. That really is transformative.
Yeah, this was the first game I actually tried with the overclocking when I got my unit, and I was very impressed by just how clean it was now.
It could similarly Clay Fighter 63 and a third, Audie's favorite game.
I did not play that.
That actually runs really smooth now. That used to have horrible performance. Trying to go
now
for
it's just
60,
horrible.
but not really getting there. Now the game's just horrible. But bad Mr. Frosty though. Okay, I got no reaction out of that. That's fine. Let's switch to a good game, Blast Core. This is actually an interesting one that sort of parlays in what you were talking about, Mark. So for Blast Core, I just let the track demos play. And the thing I noticed right away is that the game, when the frame rate drops, the game speed is impacted and it runs slow.
Right.
So in the original version, it drops below 30 FPS constantly. Whereas when Unleashed, it actually just seems to hold 30 FPS across the board. So it's very, very stable. But when you compare the two demos, you find out that, oh, wait, because of that, the Unleashed mode completes the demo much faster, and they basically go out of sync.
I guess the question is that a problem? I mean, for one, we are overclocking, so it's kind of at your own peril. We know we're already deviating from behavior of original hardware. So is it a problem? I don't know. It was pretty typical in this era for games to slow down rather than just like drop frames, but continue moving on at the same speed as they do today. But so some things are going to go a little out of sync. We'll talk about that a bit later. But in the case of pure performance, it's mostly only going to be a good thing for gameplay. And I think you're going to actually very, very rarely see issues just because the game was able to complete a demo or something faster than it would on original hardware.
Exactly. So in most of these cases, it just basically means that you have like a more consistent experience and you're running at the intended cap. And I think just the way that they set up the game timers and everything back then uh, didn't allow it to vary without the game speed being adjusted. And I think it's okay like this in most cases, though. So like, I'm not familiar enough with something like Super Smash Brothers to gauge this, but people that saw clips in your video try instantly notice that, oh wait, that looks too fast.
I mean, this was just like idle animations in my video. I'm like, how could they tell? But yeah,
People they can sure tell.
again, it's at your own peril if you're overclocking.
Yes, exactly. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. But one last game that I tested for fun was San Francisco Rush, actually. And this is an interesting one because this was a game that always ran like trash. Basically 20 FPS on average with some jumps above and below. And this is actually one of the single best examples I actually saw out of this mode, in that when running Unleashed mode, you now get basically a 100% locked 30 frames per second with perfectly even frame pacing. Like, it is, the difference is so significant that it has become now the smoothest version of San Francisco Rush.
Wow.
Like, the arcade version does not run this well. The versions included in the Midway Arcade Treasures Volume 3, they don't run this well. This is now the smoothest version of the game.
This was one of my favorite rentals back in the day, and I loved it so much, and it's always been very depressing how difficult this one is to go back to. I mean, I am N64 born and bred. Like, I've got a tough stomach for bad frame rates.
Born and bred.
San Francisco Rush is it's one of the ones that's just really hard to play now, I think. So I should try this one overclocking.
Exactly.
Like,
There's a decomp of it now, right?
Maybe.
I think so. Yeah.
If so, that's really interesting. I'd like to try that out. There's actually multiple Rush games in 64.
Yeah.
I noticed 2049, of course, but there's also 2, like Rush the Rock, I guess. And all of them benefit equally from this overclocking and run excellent now, which is awesome to see. So, and of course, there's many other games. I don't have footage of it all. You know, Conker's Bad Fur Day is a great one that runs. That's so much more playable now. You know, same with Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie. Like, it basically fixes all the problems that they had.
Banjo-Tooie is a master.
Especially.
I actually recorded some of that, so you might be able to see it on screen right now. But yeah, that game was so infamous back in the day for how badly it runs. And you're going from, like, you know, roughly 18, I think, to 30, if I recall correctly. I mean, it's smooth. It's a big difference.
That was a big problem with a lot of the late Rare games for the system. It's like they just pushed the visuals too hard for the system, and you ended up with these really bad frame rates.
It's always blew my mind that they went for 60 FPS in Star Fox Adventures after, like, doing so bad on frame rate in the N64 generation.
Yeah, exactly. And then immediately walking that back once they went to Xbox.
Yeah.
And they were back to their bad frame rates. But are there any other games that you tested, Mark? I'm actually curious about your results.
Yeah, so looking at the list I put here, I think The World Is Not Enough is an interesting one, or Die Welt ist nicht genug, as it is in Deutschland.
Yes.
But I remember you and Audie played a little bit of that for a video some years ago, and man, the frame rate is bad.
The World may not be enough, but the frame rate is also not enough.
And, you know, I enjoyed that game actually back in the day. I thought it was, you know, a pretty good compromise for the lack of another rare developed Bond game. But I've been reluctant to recommend it to people in years since. But I did enjoy it back then. But now it's not locked 30, but it's by and large 30 FPS. It's pretty good now.
Yeah, I would agree. It's come a long way from where it used to be.
Yeah.
Which is awesome to see.
Something else I tried was Extreme G. Both
Right.
Yeah.
of the Extreme G games, they do not perform well on original hardware, which is problematic for a futuristic racer that's, trying to be fast, right? And at least the first one, at least in one track, I mean, testing was more broad, across multiple games than, getting into all the different levels and stuff. And I don't necessarily know that game particularly well, but yeah, I was getting very good 30 FPS results in Extreme G. So that I'm excited to dig more into that. Same situation with Star Wars Episode 1 Racing.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
Which was a game I hated
Yeah.
back in the day, and now I'm kind of like, I think I could get into this. However, that has image quality issues because we'll probably be talking a little bit about 480i as we wrap up the performance section. But yeah, that game seems quite good now. All like Factor 5's games all get pretty good improvements. I've not like actually checked frame rate data on those, but like just by eye, they are much higher than they used to be.
Actually, before we move away from Star Wars related things, Audie and I, we spent a lot of time messing with Star Wars Shadows of the Empire.
Love
It's
it.
a favorite of ours. And found some interesting things, both related to the 3D and not. So first of all, as expected, the performance is much, much faster. And interestingly, it actually ends up sharing some of the issues as the PC version, where the frame rate is uncapped and can run up to 60.
Yep.
And in areas where it runs at 60, the gameplay feels a bit too fast, which is exactly the same problem on PC.
Yep.
So it's interesting that problem persists and was originally there in that initial N64 version as well. You just couldn't tell because of how it ran. But it definitely improves like the playability of many of the stages. Like that second stage when you're running around like on original hardware, it's very, very choppy. It's so much smoother now. But this is where it got interesting, right, Audie? Like we had the game running on my CRT on an original 64. And then we had the game on the Analogue 3D. But what was interesting was I put my US copy of the game into the real N64 and my Japanese copy of the game into the Analogue 3D. And what happened exactly?
Yeah, so this confused us, right? Because we already did a DF Retro episode on Shadows of the Empire, so we thought we were kind of, the masters of Teras Kasai personally on this. And we discovered, though, that something was really off with the color, the lighting specifically in the game, and we started tinkering with the 3D itself, thinking that there was something here that's being disabled or just not projected properly. We went through every setting. We thought we found a bug.
Basically, to explain it better, like
Yes,
the
please
shadowed
do.
areas in the second stage, for instance, it's meant to look dark in areas. Like when you go into the one room and it's got this like what are they called? The ice creatures.
Oh,
The Wampas.
The Wampa. Okay, it is
Wampa
the Wampas.
Stompa.
Wampa Stompa, yeah, of course. So the Wampas, that room's supposed to be quite dark.
Yep.
On the Japanese version, it was like completely bright.
It was
And all the
completely lit up.
hallways were like very, 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 very lit up. The shadows like gone. I was like, what the heck's going on here? Like the Analog 3D can't render this correctly. It looks way too bright compared to the real hardware. And then it turns out it's the Japanese version.
Yeah.
The Japanese version actually made that change. They made a ton of changes. There's a lot of gameplay changes, but in addition to the gameplay changes, which were already like reported and known, they changed the lighting and they made some stages way brighter. So like that second stage, like it looks completely lit up now versus the original, which gets very, very dark. And it was not the Analog 3D breaking. It was literally just like, oh wait, they just made big changes to that Japanese version specifically.
That reminds me actually of, I one of the first things I decided to do when I got the Analog 3D was, I had been planning to play Space Station Silicon Valley sometime soon. It's a game I wanted to play through, and I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, why don't I just like see what it's like to have an experience like actually like playing many hours of one game and just see how it goes when doing Unleashed. And I kept thinking I'm seeing some bugs. I'm like, oh, something funny happens on the edge of the screen after you unpause the game. Oh, the aspect ratio screws up when it goes into a cutscene. Various things like this. And I would then pop it into my Ultra HDMI N64. And I'm like, oh, the exact same thing happens on original hardware. I mean, you know, there are a lot of just weird things that happen on N64 that might surprise you. And you're like, oh, is this a problem with the Analog 3D? And then it turns out it's not. You know, it just more often than not, Unleashed overclocking just works fine, and you're not going to see visual bugs or anything like that most of the time.
Most of the time.